Gods, all I want is a dad. Lonely alien girl, unaware. A CEO billionaire is listening. Edward Mason stared through the panoramic windows of his penthouse office, watching the alien metropolis of Veridia sprawl beneath him like a luminescent circuit board. 3 moons hung in the violet sky, casting prismatic shadows across the cityscape. As CEO of Terran Innovations, the most influential human-run corporation in the Galactic Commonwealth, he'd achieved what most humans could only dream of, breaking the alien corporate ceiling. Yet success tasted like ash in his mouth. "Mr. Mason, the Iridian delegation is waiting in conference room 3, his alien assistant's voice chimed through the intercom. Edward straightened his custom-tailored suit, a garment worth more than what most families earned in a year. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." At 37, Edward cut an impressive figure. His athletic frame, chiseled features, and penetrating blue-gray eyes commanded respect from humans and aliens alike. His dark hair, perfectly styled, completed the image of success. But the reflection staring back at him from the polished surface of his desk felt like a stranger. "Another merger, another billion credits," he muttered to himself. "What's the damn point?" The Iridians, tall, spindly aliens with translucent skin, wanted to partner with Terran Innovations on a new quantum propulsion system. It would add another fortune to Edward's already obscene wealth. Money that would sit untouched in accounts across 3 galaxies. The meeting proceeded like countless others before it. Edward smiled at the right moments, asked incisive questions, and demonstrated why he'd risen to the top of an alien-dominated industry. The Iridians left satisfied, and Edward returned to his empty office. His assistant forwarded the day's charity reports. Edward had established the Mason Foundation 5 years ago, more out of boredom than altruism. The foundation funded everything from medical research to historical preservation across dozens of worlds. One item caught his attention: the restoration of the Temple of Eternal Light on Veridia. The ancient structure predated even the Veridians themselves, a mysterious relic from a forgotten civilization. His foundation had donated millions to preserve it. "I should see it for myself," Edward decided suddenly. "Cancel my appointments for the afternoon." His security team protested, but Edward dismissed them with a wave. "I'll take a private shuttle, no entourage." An hour later, Edward stood before the temple's massive entrance. Unlike the sleek, bioorganic architecture that dominated Veridia, the temple was built from actual stone, a material so rarely used in modern construction that it seemed almost primitive. Inside, soft blue illumination emanated from nowhere and everywhere at once. The temple's cavernous interior was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling metropolis outside. Ancient symbols adorned the walls, their meanings lost to time. Edward wandered deeper into the temple, admiring the restoration work. His footsteps echoed on the stone floor. He'd expected to feel something, perhaps a sense of connection to history, or even just satisfaction at seeing his money well spent. Instead, he felt the same emptiness that had haunted him for years. Then he heard it, a soft, muffled sound coming from a secluded alcove. Sobbing. Edward followed the sound, turning a corner to find a small figure kneeling before an altar of glowing stone. A child, no more than 7 years old, with delicate pale green skin and flowing silver-white hair that cascaded down her slender shoulders. A young Veridian girl. Her slender, pointed ears trembled slightly as she whispered in a voice thick with tears, "Gods, all I want is a dad, nothing else. Please, I'll be good, I promise." Edward froze, not wanting to intrude on such a private moment. But something about the child's desperate plea struck him like a physical blow. Before he could retreat, his foot scraped against the stone floor. The girl whirled around, large gray-blue eyes wide with surprise. Tears had left glistening trails down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," Edward said softly. "I didn't mean to disturb you." The girl quickly wiped her tears away. "It's okay, sir. The temple is for everyone." Edward approached slowly and knelt to her level. "My name is Edward. What's yours?" "Linny," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you here alone, Linny?" She nodded, looking down at her small hands. "I'm always alone." Something in her tone made Edward's chest tighten. "Where are your parents?" Linny's shoulders slumped. "I don't have any. They left me at the care facility when I was born. The caretakers let me visit the temple on holy days." Edward felt an unfamiliar emotion surge through him, not pity but a fierce protectiveness that caught him completely off guard. "Why were you crying, Linny?" The girl looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "Because sometimes it hurts too much to keep it inside." She paused. "Do you ever feel that way, Mr. Edward?" The question hit him like a thunderbolt. This child had articulated in one simple question what he'd been unable to acknowledge for years. "Yeah," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "Yes, I do." "Sir, we've been searching everywhere for you." The sharp voice shattered the moment of connection between Edward and Linny. Three figures in sleek black uniforms emblazoned with the Terran Innovations logo appeared at the temple entrance. The lead security officer, a broad-shouldered man named Garrett, approached with barely concealed irritation. Linny's eyes widened in terror. Before Edward could reassure her, she bolted, disappearing behind a massive stone pillar and through a hidden side passage. "Wait," Edward called after her, but she was gone. Garrett reached Edward's side, scanning the temple with practiced efficiency. "Sir, you can't just disappear without notification. Protocol requires—" "Damn your protocols," Edward snapped, surprising himself with his vehemence. "That child, did you see where she went?" "The Veridian girl? Probably back to whatever care facility she belongs to." Garrett shrugged. "We need to get you back to headquarters. The Aurelian ambassador has been trying to reach you." Edward barely heard him. His mind was fixed on Linny's tear-streaked face, on her simple, heartbreaking prayer. Something about her had pierced the carefully constructed armor he'd built around himself over years of corporate warfare. "Find out which care facility houses Veridian orphans in this district," Edward ordered as they walked toward his private shuttle. "I want a complete report by morning." Garrett exchanged glances with the other security officers, but knew better than to question a direct order. Back in his penthouse that evening, Edward found himself unable to focus on the stack of contracts awaiting his signature. The image of Linny kneeling alone in the temple haunted him. He'd built his empire by understanding systems and exploiting their weaknesses. Yet he'd never given a thought to how the Veridian social welfare system functioned. His personal AI assistant, URIA, materialized as a holographic projection when he called for her. "URIO, access all public records on Veridian orphanages and care facilities." "Accessing, sir. There are 17 registered care facilities in Veridia City. Would you like me to narrow the search parameters?" "Focus on those within 10 kilometers of the Temple of Eternal Light." 3 facilities match those criteria: the Veridian Youth Collective, the Sanctuary of New Beginnings, and the State Guardianship Center. Edward frowned. "Show me their inspection records, funding sources, and adoption rates." The data that scrolled before him painted a troubling picture. While the facilities appeared adequately funded on paper, the inspection reports noted overcrowding and understaffing. Most concerning were the adoption statistics, or lack thereof. "URIA, why are the adoption rates so low? These facilities are housing thousands of children, but only a handful are placed with families each year." "Veridian cultural traditions place high value on bloodlines. Show me, sir. Adoption outside genetic lineages is uncommon. Additionally, there appear to be significant regulatory barriers to the adoption process." Edward leaned forward, his instincts for detecting systemic failures now fully engaged. "What kind of barriers?" "The Veridian Ancestral Preservation Act of 2187 requires that orphan children be placed only with families of identical sublineage. Given the specificity of Veridian genetic classifications, finding exact matches is statistically improbable." "And what about cross-species adoption? Humans adopting Veridians?" Yura's holographic form flickered momentarily. "Such arrangements are prohibited, sir. The interspecies adoption ban has been in effect for over 70 years. Edward's jaw tightened. "Who benefits from keeping these children institutionalized?" "The care facilities receive substantial government funding based on occupancy rates. Additionally, several corporations have contracts to provide services to these institutions." Yuria paused. "Including 3 subsidiaries of Terran Innovations, acquired during your predecessor's tenure." Edward felt a cold anger building inside him. He'd been unknowingly profiting from a system that kept children like Linny trapped in institutional care. URA, prepare my shuttle for tomorrow morning. I'm going to visit these facilities personally. Sir, your schedule tomorrow includes... Clear it. All of it. The next morning, Edward stood outside the imposing facade of the State Guardianship Center, the largest of the 3 facilities near the temple. Unlike the gleaming architectural marvels that dominated Veridia's skyline, the center was a utilitarian block of gray composite material, its windows narrow and few. Edward had dressed down for the occasion, wearing simple clothing that wouldn't immediately mark him as one of the wealthiest humans in the Commonwealth. He wanted to see the facility as it truly operated, not a sanitized version presented to a visiting dignitary. The Veridian administrator who greeted him, a tall male with the characteristic green skin and silver hair of his species, seemed suspicious of Edward's interest. We rarely have humans inquiring about our operations, Mr. Mason, Administrator Prell said, leading Edward through sterile corridors. Especially humans of your prominence. I'm expanding my foundation's focus to include child welfare, Edward replied smoothly. I believe in seeing potential investments firsthand. The tour revealed exactly what Edward had suspected. While not overtly abusive, the facility was coldly institutional. Children moved in orderly groups between activities, their expressions vacant. There was no laughter, no play, no joy, just the efficient processing of young lives through a system designed to warehouse rather than nurture them. And nowhere did he see Linny. Minister Threll will see you now, Mr. Mason. The Veridian receptionist's voice carried the musical lilt characteristic of her species, but her eyes held a wariness that Edward had grown accustomed to seeing in government buildings. Humans weren't typically granted private audiences with high-ranking Veridian officials, especially not on short notice. But Edward Mason wasn't a typical human. He straightened his tie and entered the ornate office of Veridian's Minister of Social Welfare. The room was a study in contradictions. Ancient ceremonial artifacts displayed alongside ultra-modern technology, all bathed in the soft purple light preferred by Veridian officials. Minister Threll rose from behind a desk carved from a single piece of rare lunar wood. Like most male Veridians in positions of authority, he was tall and imposing, his pale green skin darkening to emerald around his eyes and the ridges of his forehead. Silver white hair was pulled back in an elaborate braid that signified his high social rank. Mr. Mason? Threll's voice was deep and melodious. This is an unexpected honor. Humans rarely take interest in our social welfare systems. Edward accepted the offered seat. Perhaps that's part of the problem, Minister. Threll's expression remained neutral, but Edward noted the slight stiffening of his posture. Problem? I wasn't aware there was one. I visited the State Guardianship Center yesterday, Edward said, keeping his tone conversational. I found the conditions concerning. Our care facilities meet all Commonwealth standards, Threll replied smoothly. We take great pride in our efficiency. Efficiency, Edward echoed. Is that what you call warehousing children without hope of placement? A flicker of annoyance crossed Threll's features before his diplomatic mask slipped back into place. Mr. Mason, you must understand that Veridian cultural traditions are complex. Our lineage systems have preserved social harmony for millennia. Edward leaned forward. At the expense of children like Lonnie? The name dropped like a stone in still water. Threll's eyes narrowed. You know a specific child? I met her at the Temple of Eternal Light. She was praying for a father. Edward held Threll's gaze. I'd like to help her. Threll rose and walked to a window overlooking the capital's central district. The interspecies adoption ban exists for good reasons, Mr. Mason. Cultural preservation is paramount to Veridian society. Cultural preservation, Edward repeated. Or is it financial preservation? Threll turned sharply. I don't follow. My team has been analyzing the financial structures behind your care facilities, Edward said, pulling up a holographic display from his wrist device. The government allocates substantial funds per child, yet the actual expenditure on care is roughly 30% of that amount. The remainder flows through a complex network of shell companies. Edward swiped through several financial diagrams. Companies that, interestingly enough, all lead back to a holding corporation called Ancestral Heritage Limited. A corporation where you, Minister Threll, hold a significant stake. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Threll's face hardened into an expressionless mask. You've done your homework, Mr. Mason, but you're playing a dangerous game. Humans may dominate Commonwealth commerce, but here on Veridia, we still control the political landscape. Edward smiled thinly. I'm not playing any game, Minister. I simply want to adopt Linny. Threll barked a laugh. Impossible. The law is absolute. Laws can be changed. Not this one. Threll's voice dropped to a near whisper. The ancestral codes are sacred. A human raising a Veridian child. The very suggestion is blasphemous. Edward stood, matching Threll's height. Is it blasphemy, Minister, or is it just bad for business? The two men stared at each other in tense silence before Threll's communication device chimed. He checked it with a frown. This meeting is over, Mr. Mason. I suggest you focus on your corporate endeavors and leave Veridian social policy to those who understand it. Edward nodded politely. Thank you for your time, Minister. I'll see myself out. As Edward walked through the government complex, his security chief, Garrett, fell into step beside him. How did it go? Garrett asked quietly. About as expected. Threll's involved up to his eyeballs in the orphanage racket. Edward kept his voice low. Any luck finding in Linny? Garrett shook his head. She's not at any of the 3 facilities near the temple. We're expanding the search, but there are thousands of children in the system. Edward's jaw tightened. Keep looking. And get me everything you can on Ancestral Heritage Limited. Board members, financial records, political connections, everything. Sir, Garrett hesitated, you're making powerful enemies. The Veridian political establishment doesn't respond well to outside pressure. I'm not pressuring them, Edward replied as they exited into the bright Veridian day. I'm declaring war on them. Back in his private shuttle, Edward reviewed the data his team had gathered. The more he dug, the more corruption he uncovered. The orphanage system wasn't just a cultural institution. It was a profit center for Veridian elites, with children as the commodity. His communication device chimed with an incoming call from an unknown source. Edward hesitated before accepting. A female Veridian face appeared on the screen. Unlike the silver-haired majority, her hair had a distinct azure tint, a rare genetic variation. Her features were striking, with high cheekbones and unusually bright eyes that seemed to pierce through the screen. Mr. Mason, her voice was low and melodious. My name is Neria Voss. I believe we have a mutual interest in Veridian orphans, particularly a girl named Linny. Edward's pulse quickened. You know where she is? I do. Neria's expression remained guarded. But speaking about this over communication channels is unwise. Minister Threll has many ears. Name the place. The Crimson Garden tonight at sunset. Come alone. Her image flickered. And Mr. Mason, be careful who you trust. Not all Veridians support the ancestral codes. The transmission ended, leaving Edward staring at a blank screen, hope and suspicion warring within him. The Crimson Garden lived up to its name. Bioluminescent red flora adorned every surface, casting the exclusive establishment in a warm, intimate glow. Located in Veridia's arts district, it was a place where the elite gathered away from government scrutiny, a neutral ground where deals were made and secrets exchanged. Edward arrived alone as requested, though he'd positioned Garrett and a security team nearby. He wore casual attire that wouldn't immediately mark him as the CEO of Terran Innovations, but there was no disguising his humanity in a venue predominantly frequented by Veridians. He felt eyes tracking him as he made his way to a secluded booth in the back. A server approached, antennae twitching with curiosity at serving a human customer. Nectarine spirits, Edward ordered, selecting a drink palatable to both human and Veridian biology. Make that 2, came a melodious voice from behind. Edward turned to find Neria Voss standing there, and his breath caught involuntarily. In person, she was even more striking than in their brief communication. Her azure-tinted hair cascaded in waves past her shoulders, contrasting with the deep emerald of her eyes. Unlike the formal, flowing robes favored by most Veridian women, she wore a fitted garment that accentuated her lithe form. Mr. Mason, she said, sliding into the booth across from him, thank you for coming. You said you know where Leni is, Edward replied, getting straight to the point. Is she safe? Neria studied him with those penetrating eyes. She's safe for now, but first I need to know why a human billionaire is so interested in one Veridian orphan. Edward considered his words carefully. I met her by chance. Something about her connected with me. Connected? Neria raised an elegant eyebrow. Humans and Veridians don't typically connect. Maybe they should, Edward countered. Maybe these barriers we've constructed are more about power and control than cultural preservation. A smile played at the corners of Neria's lips. Dangerous thoughts, Mr. Mason. Edward, please. Edward. His name sounded different in her accent, the second syllable elongated in a way that sent an unexpected shiver down his spine. Their drinks arrived and Neria raised hers in a toast. To dangerous thoughts. As they drank, Edward noticed subtle differences in her mannerisms compared to other Veridians he'd encountered. She maintained eye contact longer, sat closer than the usual Veridian comfort distance, and her gestures were more fluid, less formal. You're not like other Veridians, he observed. And you're not like other humans, she countered. Most would never challenge Minister Threll directly. You know about that? I know many things, Edward, including the fact that you've made yourself a target. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. I'm part of the Luminous Path, a resistance movement working to dismantle the corrupt systems that have taken root in our society. Edward's interest sharpened. Including the orphanage system? Especially that. Neria's expression darkened. What began as cultural preservation has become a profit machine. Children like Leni are commodities to men like Threll. And you can help me find her? I can do more than that. Neria's fingers brushed against his as she passed him a small data chip. This contains evidence of financial fraud throughout the system, linking Threll and 12 other ministers directly to embezzlement schemes. Edward pocketed the chip. Why give this to me? Because you have what we lack. A platform that can't be silenced. Veridian whistleblowers disappear. Human CEOs with Commonwealth connections don't. Their conversation continued as they ordered a second round of drinks. Edward found himself increasingly drawn to Neria. Not just her beauty, but her passion, intelligence, and the fierce determination that animated her features when she spoke of justice. How did you get involved in them? He asked. A shadow crossed her face. My sister's child was taken, declared genetically unsuitable for our lineage due to a minor variation. I never saw either of them again. Edward reached across the table, taking her hand in his. The contact sent a jolt through him. Her skin was warmer than a human's, with a subtle texture like fine silk. I'm sorry, he said simply. Neria looked at their joined hands, then back to his face with an expression of wonder. You truly care, don't you? It's not just about business or politics for you. No, Edward admitted. It's about Leni, about giving her what she prayed for. Something shifted in Neria's eyes. A recognition, a connection that transcended their biological differences. The air between them seemed to charge with unspoken possibility. We should go somewhere more private, she suggested, her voice taking on a husky quality that made Edward's pulse quicken. There are details about Leni's location that shouldn't be discussed here. They left the Crimson Garden together, the night air of Veridia cool against their skin. Neria led him to a small apartment in an artistic quarter of the city, far from the government district. Inside, the space was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the sterile minimalism preferred by most Veridians. Artifacts from various worlds adorned the walls, suggesting a mind open to experiences beyond her own culture. You've traveled, Edward observed, examining a ceremonial mask from Earth's Pacific Islands. Whenever possible, Neria replied, preparing a traditional Veridian tea. I find other cultures fascinating, especially humans. Your species adapts so quickly, embraces change instead of fearing it. She brought the tea, sitting beside him on a low couch. Their proximity sent Edward's senses into overdrive. Her scent was subtle and exotic, like night-blooming flowers with an underlying spice. Tomorrow, she said, I can take you to Leni. She's at a sanctuary we maintain for children we've rescued from the system. Thank you, Edward said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Their eyes met and held. The tension that had been building between them all evening crystallized into something undeniable. Edward reached out, brushing a strand of azure hair from her face. Neria leaned into his touch, her eyes half closing. "Viridians don't usually," she began. "Neither do humans," he replied softly. What followed was a discovery of differences and surprising similarities. Cultural barriers fell away as ancient instincts took over, their connection transcending the biological divide between their species. In the warm darkness of her apartment, they found a harmony that defied conventional wisdom about human Viridian compatibility. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Neria traced the contours of his face with wonder. "Your people have a saying, don't they? About humanity?" Edward smiled. "Humanity? Fuck yeah!" She laughed, the sound like music. I think I understand it now." Dawn broke over Veridia with a cascade of purple and gold that filtered through Neria's windows. Edward woke first, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, before memories of the night flooded back. Beside him, Neria slept peacefully, her azure-tinted hair spread across the pillow like exotic silk. He studied her features in the soft morning light, the delicate ridge along her forehead, the subtle iridescence of her pale green skin. Last night had been a revelation. Despite the biological differences between their species, they'd found a profound connection that transcended the physical. Neria stirred, her emerald eyes fluttering open. A smile spread across her face as she reached out to trace the contours of his jaw. "You're still here," she murmured. "I half expected to wake and find this was all a dream." Edward caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Very real and surprisingly compatible. She laughed, the sound like wind chimes. "Human adaptability, it's your species' most attractive quality." They shared a light breakfast of fruits compatible with both their biologies. Edward marveled at the easy intimacy between them, as if they'd known each other for years rather than hours. "The sanctuary is about an hour from the city," Neria explained as they prepared to leave. "We keep it hidden in the foothills of the Luminous Range. The magnetic fields there interfere with standard scanning technology." Edward contacted Garrett, instructing his security chief to maintain distance, but remain on alert. Then they set off in Neria's personal transport, a sleek vehicle that hugged the ground as it sped away from the urban sprawl. As the city gave way to the wild beauty of Veridia's countryside, Neria explained more about the luminous path. "We started as a cultural preservation movement, ironically enough," she said, navigating a winding mountain road. "Our founders believed that true Veridian culture was being corrupted by the political elite, who twisted ancient traditions to serve their own ends." "Like the orphanage system," Edward observed. "Exactly. The ancestral codes were meant to honor lineage, not imprison children." Her hands tightened on the controls. What began as respect for heritage became a tool for control and profit. The transport turned off the main road onto a nearly invisible path that wound through dense, colorful vegetation. After several security checkpoints manned by Veridians with the same fierce determination as Neria, they arrived at what appeared to be a natural formation in the mountainside. "Home," Neria said simply as a hidden door slid open. Inside the sanctuary was a marvel of design. Natural light filtered through cleverly disguised apertures, illuminating a sprawling complex built into the mountain itself. The space felt warm and welcoming, nothing like the sterile institutions Edward had visited. Most striking were the children, dozens of them, of various ages, playing in open areas or engaged in learning activities. Unlike the subdued orphans at the State Guardianship Center, these children were animated, laughing, their eyes bright with curiosity and life. "We've rescued over 60 so far," Neria explained. "Children deemed unsuitable for placement due to minor genetic variations or simply because they had no wealthy relatives to claim them." A small group of children noticed their arrival and approached cautiously, curious about the human visitor. Edward knelt to their level, smiling warmly. "Hello," he said in careful Veridian. A boy of about 10 responded in perfect English. "Your accent is terrible, but we appreciate the effort." Edward laughed, delighted by the child's boldness. The tension broke, and soon he was surrounded by curious young Veridians, peppering him with questions about Earth and humans. "They learn multiple languages here," Neria explained. "We believe in preparing them for a universe beyond Veridia's borders." Edward scanned the gathering children, searching for one face in particular. Lieni, Neria touched his arm. This way. She led him to a quiet corner where a small figure sat alone, carefully assembling a complex three-dimensional puzzle. Edward's heart leapt as he recognized the silver-white hair and delicate profile. "Lieni," he called softly. The girl looked up, her gray-blue eyes widening in recognition. "The man from the temple." She abandoned her puzzle and rushed toward him. Without hesitation, Edward knelt and opened his arms. Lieni crashed into his embrace with such force that he nearly toppled backward. "You came," she whispered against his shoulder. "I prayed and prayed, and you came." Edward held her gently, something fierce and protective awakening in his chest. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Lieni pulled back, studying his face with solemn intensity. "Why?" "Because," Edward said simply, "no one should have to pray for a father. Everyone deserves to be loved." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but before she could respond, a sharp alert sounded throughout the sanctuary. Neria's communication device buzzed urgently. "What is it?" Edward asked, instinctively pulling Lieni closer. Neria's expression darkened as she read the message. "Your AI assistant, Urea, is trying to reach you. Threll has frozen all Terran Innovations assets on Veridia." Edward's mind raced. "He's escalating. How did he move so quickly? He must have informants who tracked our meeting." Neria's voice was tight with concern. "This isn't just about Lieni anymore. He's declaring war on your company." Edward activated his secure communication link. "Uria status report." The AI's holographic form materialized from his wrist device. "Sir, Minister Threll has issued an emergency executive order citing corporate espionage as justification for freezing all Terran Innovations holdings on Veridia. Our local accounts, properties, and operations are currently inaccessible. Casualties? None, sir. Our personnel have been detained for questioning, but not harmed." Edward's jaw tightened. "Initiate protocol firewall. Transfer all essential operations to our Commonwealth stations." "Already in progress, sir." Edward turned to Neria, who was watching with a mixture of concern and admiration. "Threll's made a critical mistake. He's assuming I care more about my company than about what's right." "And you don't?" she asked. Edward looked down at Lieni, who was clinging to his hand, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his. "Some things matter more than money." Neria's expression softened. "You continue to surprise me, Edward Mason." Their moment was interrupted by another alert. One of Neria's colleagues rushed in, his expression grim. "Security drones are converging on this sector," he reported. "Standard search pattern. They'll find us within the hour." Neria straightened, immediately shifting into leadership mode. "Begin evacuation procedures. Priority transport for the youngest children first." Edward contacted Garrett. "I need extraction for approximately 60 children and 20 adults, and prepare the Horizon for immediate departure." "The Horizon?" Neria questioned. "My personal starship," Edward explained. "Registered under Commonwealth protection. Once we're aboard, Threll can't touch us without causing an interstellar incident." As the sanctuary erupted into organized chaos, Lieni tugged at Edward's sleeve. "Are you taking me with you?" Edward knelt again to her level. "If that's what you want." The girl's eyes shone with hope and fear. Will you be my dad?" Edward felt something shift inside him, as if the last empty chamber of his heart had suddenly filled. "Yes, Lieni, I would be honored to be your dad." The evacuation proceeded with military precision. Edward watched as Neria's people loaded children into transports bound for a hidden landing pad, where Garrett waited with a shuttle to ferry them to the Horizon. Lieni clung to Edward's hand, her small fingers intertwined with his, as if afraid he might disappear. "How many more?" Edward asked as another transport departed. "2 more groups," Neria replied, checking her tactical display. 20 minutes until... A low rumble interrupted her, followed by the distinctive whine of military-grade engines. Edward's combat instincts, honed during his early career in Earth's defense forces, kicked in immediately. "They're here," he said grimly. Through the sanctuary's hidden observation system, they watched as a fleet of sleek black vehicles surrounded the mountain base. Dozens of heavily armed Veridian security forces deployed in tactical formation, but it was the central figure emerging from the lead vehicle that drew Edward's attention. Minister Threll himself had come, his tall frame draped in ceremonial robes of office that did little to disguise the cold authority in his bearing. "He never leaves the capital for enforcement actions," Neria whispered, her face pale. "This is personal for him." Edward's communication device chimed. "Sir," Garrett's voice came through, "we've got the first 3 groups aboard the shuttle, but Threll's forces have deployed atmospheric scramblers. Our next run will be their last chance to reach us." "Understood. Prepare for its immediate departure once the final group is loaded." Edward turned to Neria, whose emerald eyes reflected the tactical displays showing Threll's forces surrounding them. "Get Linny on that last transport," he said quietly. Neria's eyes widened. "What are you planning?" Before Edward could answer, the sanctuary's communication system crackled to life with Minister Threll's voice. "Edward Mason, I know you can hear me. Your interference in Veridian affairs ends today." Edward activated the response channel. "Minister, this is quite the reception committee for a simple corporate dispute. Now, this ceased to be a corporate matter when you conspired to violate our most sacred laws." Threll's voice was ice. "Surrender yourself to face charges of cultural subversion and espionage, and the remaining children will be granted safe passage off-world." Edward's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse? Then we will extract you by force, and everyone in that facility will be charged as accomplices." The communication cut off, leaving a heavy silence. Linny looked up at Edward, her gray-blue eyes wide with fear. "You can't go out there," she whispered. He'll hurt you." Edward knelt to her level, gently brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "Sometimes, Linny, being a father means making difficult choices to protect those you love." "But I just found you," she said, tears welling in her eyes. Edward pulled her into a tight embrace. "And you won't lose me. I promise." He looked up at Neria, whose expression had shifted from concern to determination. "Get her and the remaining children to the horizon. I'll buy you time." "There has to be another way," Neria insisted. Edward stood, his mind racing through scenarios with the strategic precision that had made him a corporate titan. "There is, but I need you to trust me." He pulled her aside, speaking in hushed tones as he outlined his plan. Neria's eyes widened, then narrowed with understanding. "That's insane," she said, "and brilliant." "It's human, Edward replied with a grim smile. "We specialize in the impossible." They shared a brief, fierce kiss, a promise, a connection that transcended their biological differences. In that moment, Edward realized that what had begun as physical attraction had evolved into something deeper, something that frightened and exhilarated him in equal measure. "Keep her safe," he whispered against Neria's lips. "I will," she promised, "with my life." Edward knelt once more before Linny. "I need you to go with Neria now. She'll take you to my ship." "You're coming too, right?" Linny's voice trembled. "As soon as I can," he assured her. "But first I need to have a conversation with Minister Threll." Linny threw her arms around his neck. "Promise you'll be my dad, no matter what." "I promise," Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. "From this day forward, you'll never be alone again." With a final embrace, he watched as Neria led Linny toward the last transport, the girl looking back over her shoulder until they disappeared around a corner. Edward straightened his clothing and activated his communication device. "URIA, execute Protocol Sunlight. Authorization Mason Alpha 79. Protocol Sunlight activated, sir," the AI responded. "Commonwealth authorities have been notified. Transmission commencing." Edward took a deep breath and walked toward the sanctuary's main entrance. With each step, he felt a strange calm settle over him. For years he had built his empire, accumulated wealth and power, yet remained hollow inside. Now, with everything at risk, he felt more alive than ever. The massive doors slid open, revealing the mountain vista now swarming with Veridian security forces. Edward stepped out, hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. Minister Threll stood at the center of the formation, his pale green features arranged in a mask of triumph. "A wise decision, Mr. Mason," Threll called, "though unexpected from a human." Edward walked forward with measured steps. "I've found that exceeding expectations is good business practice, Minister." As he reached Threll, Edward noted the security forces closing in behind him, cutting off his retreat. You will face the full penalty of Veridian law, Threll said, his voice carrying for the benefit of the recording devices capturing the arrest. Your assets will be permanently seized, your corporation dismantled on our world. Edward smiled, a predator's smile that gave Threll momentary pause. Before we proceed with the theatrics, Minister, I think you should know something. Your threats are meaningless now? Not a threat, a fact. Edward's voice remained calm. Every word of this conversation is being broadcast live to the Commonwealth Council in the Galactic Media Network. Threll's composure slipped for the first time. What? Protocol Sunlight, Edward explained. A contingency I established years ago. My AI has been collecting and transmitting evidence of your orphanage scheme for the past 24 hours. The minister's eyes darted to his aides, who were frantically checking their devices. One nodded grimly, confirming Edward's claim. A desperate ploy, Threll snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Perhaps, Edward conceded, but I think the Commonwealth will be particularly interested in how you've been violating the Sentient Rights Accord by commodifying children for profit. Threll's face darkened to a deep emerald. You would risk everything, your company, your freedom, your life? For what? A handful of genetically inferior orphans? Edward's eyes hardened. For one child who prayed for a father, for a promise I intend to keep. A commotion from above drew their attention. The distinctive silhouette of the horizon appeared through the clouds, its massive form descending toward the mountain with the grace of a predator. It seems we're out of time for negotiations, Edward said. Your move, Minister. The standoff stretched like a wire pulled taut. Edward stood unflinching before Threll, whose emerald features had darkened with rage. Above them, the horizon hovered, its massive silhouette casting shadows across the mountainside. You've overplayed your hand, Mason, Threll snarled, his composure cracking. One human against the might of Veridian security forces? Your Commonwealth is too far to help you now. As if summoned by his words, the sky erupted with the distinctive thunder of atmospheric entry. 3 sleek vessels bearing Commonwealth peacekeeping insignia broke through the clouds, their weapon systems visibly active. You were saying, Minister? Edward's lips curved in a tight smile. A Commonwealth transmission cut in or through all communication channels. This is Admiral Chastain of the Commonwealth Peacekeeping Force. By authority of the Sentient Rights Accord, we are establishing a protective zone. All Veridian security forces are ordered to stand down immediately. Threll's face contorted with disbelief. Impossible. The Commonwealth Council would never authorize intervention this quickly. They didn't need to, Edward explained calmly. The Sentient Rights Accord gives the peacekeeping force autonomous authority when presented with clear evidence of rights violations against children. He tapped his wrist device, projecting a holographic display of Commonwealth legal code. Section 47.3, Minister. Perhaps you should have studied human legal innovations more carefully. Threll's eyes darted between the descending peacekeepers and Edward. Something dangerous flickered in his gaze. If I fall, he hissed, you fall with me. With startling speed, Threll drew a concealed weapon from his robes. Edward reacted instantly, diving to the side as energy discharge scorched the ground where he'd stood. Security forces scattered, caught between conflicting loyalties as their minister opened fire on an unarmed civilian before witnesses. Edward rolled behind a transport vehicle, combat training from his military days flooding back. Threll advanced, firing wildly, his face twisted with hatred. You humans think you can change millennia of tradition? Threll shouted. Your arrogance is boundless. Not arrogance, Edward called back. Hope, something your system stripped from those children. Threll's next shot grazed Edward's shoulder, searing through fabric to skin. Pain lanced down his arm, but he kept moving, leading Threll away from the sanctuary entrance, where peacekeepers were now landing. You could never understand our ways, Threll ranted, stalking forward. Lineage is everything. Purity must be maintained. And profit? Edward challenged, circling behind a rock formation. Was that also part of your ancient tradition? Threll's response was another barrage of energy fire. Edward calculated his options, knowing he needed to keep Threll occupied until the peacekeepers could secure the area. He was outgunned but not outmatched. Humanity's greatest strength had always been adaptability. Using the rocky terrain to his advantage, Edward maneuvered Threll toward a narrow passage where his wildfiring would be constrained. The minister followed, his rage making him predictable. "You know what your real mistake was, Threll?" Edward called, drawing him deeper into the trap. "Enlighten me, human," Threll spat, advancing cautiously. "You forgot what you were fighting for?" Edward's voice echoed off the stone walls. "You wrapped yourself in tradition while forgetting its purpose, to protect the next generation, not exploit them." Threll rounded the corner, weapon raised, and found himself facing not just Edward, but a squad of Commonwealth peacekeepers with weapons trained on him. "Minister Threll," the lead peacekeeper announced, "you are detained under Commonwealth authority for violations of the Sentient Rights Accord and attempted murder." Threll's weapon clattered to the ground as reality crashed down upon him. His empire of corruption, built over decades, had crumbled in days because of one human's promise to a child. As the peacekeepers led Threll away, Edward made his way to the Horizon's landing site. His shoulder throbbed, but the pain was distant compared to his need to see Linny. The ship's boarding ramp lowered as he approached. Linny was the first to emerge, breaking free from Neria's gentle restraint and running headlong toward him. "Dad!" she cried, the words sending a surge of emotion through Edward that dwarfed any business victory he'd ever achieved. He caught her in his arms, lifting her high despite his injured shoulder. "I told you I'd keep my promise." Neria followed more sedately, though her eyes betrayed her relief. When she reached them, she touched Edward's wounded shoulder with gentle concern. "You're hurt," she said softly. "It's nothing," Edward assured her, still holding Linny. "Humans," Neria sighed with fond exasperation, always downplaying injuries to appear strong. "Is it working?" Edward asked with a wink that made Linny giggle. "Distressingly well," Neria admitted, her lips curving in a smile that sent warmth through him unrelated to his injury. Admiral Chastain approached, her Commonwealth uniform immaculate despite the chaotic operation. "Mr. Mason, we've secured Minister Threll and his key associates. The evidence you provided is overwhelming." "And the children?" Edward asked. "The Commonwealth Council has granted emergency protective status to all orphans rescued from the system," Chastain confirmed. "They'll be placed under Commonwealth guardianship until permanent arrangements can be made." Edward looked down at Linny, then at Neria. "And what about adoption? Specifically, interspecies adoption?" Chastain smiled. "The Council has suspended Veridia's interspecies adoption ban, pending a full review. In the meantime, provisional adoptions will be processed for cases with clear humanitarian justification." "Like a human CEO adopting a Veridian orphan?" Edward asked. "Precisely like that," Chastain nodded. "The paperwork is already being processed." Linny's eyes widened. "Really? You'll really be my dad? Forever?" "Forever," Edward promised. "Though there's something else I'd like to ask." He turned to Nerikia, whose azure-tinted hair shimmered in the sunlight. "Would you consider joining us? Not just as Linny's guardian, but as part of our family?" Neria's emerald eyes softened. "Are you proposing what I think you're proposing, Edward Mason?" "I am, Minet Hebri," he confirmed, his heart racing with a different kind of adrenaline than he'd felt facing Threll. "Humans move quickly when we know what we want, and I've never been more certain of anything." "Interspecies marriage is even more taboo than adoption?" Neria pointed out, though her expression held no rejection. "Then we'll change that too," Edward said simply. "Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our adaptability. It's our capacity to love beyond boundaries." Neria stepped closer, her fingers intertwining with his. "In that case, yes. Though I warn you, Veridian marriage traditions are quite elaborate." "I look forward to learning them," Edward replied, his free arm still holding Linny, who was watching them with undisguised delight. "Does this mean you'll be my mom?" the girl asked Neria directly. Neria's composure broke then, her eyes glistening with tears as she nodded. "Yes, little one, if you'll have me." Linny's response was to reach out, pulling Neria into their embrace. For a moment they stood together, human, Veridians, a family forged not by blood but by choice. 6 months later, Edward stood on the balcony of their new home on the neutral Commonwealth world of Novaterra. Behind him, the sounds of Linny's birthday celebration filtered through open doors, laughter, music, the mingling of human and Veridian voices. Neria joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "Penny, for your thoughts, husband." Just thinking about how much has changed, Edward replied, drawing her close. Threll's network dismantled, the orphanage system reformed, Terran innovations now leading interspecies adoption initiatives across the Commonwealth. And a certain CEO who found his heart in an ancient temple, Neria added, her head resting against his shoulder. Inside, Linny was showing off her new linguistic skills to a mixed group of human and Veridian children, all former orphans now placed with families through the Mason Foundation's adoption program. She prayed for a father, Edward mused. She got a revolution instead. That's humanity for you, Neria laughed softly. Never doing anything by half measures. Edward turned to his wife, still marveling at how perfectly they fit together despite their biological differences. Any regrets about tying your fate to a stubborn human? Neria's answer was a kiss that transcended species, culture, and tradition, a promise as binding as any legal document. From inside came Linny's voice, calling them to join the celebration. Hand in hand, they turned toward their daughter and the future they were building together, a future where no child would need to pray for a family, and where love recognized no boundaries of biology or tradition. As they rejoined the party, Edward caught Linny's eye across the room. She beamed at him, her gray-blue eyes shining with the secure happiness of a child who knew beyond any doubt that she was loved. In that moment, Edward knew that all his wealth, all his corporate achievements, paled in comparison to this. The simple, profound joy of being exactly what Linny had prayed for. A dad